So, welcome to the first video that I'm doing for you guys. I've done a couple already for my world history guys, but I thought I would do one for you. This one falls under the social studies standard for American government and civics, or civics and government, compare and contrast various systems of government, and the topic of this one is called Principles of Democracy. I thought it would be important for us to talk a little bit about these 14 principles of democracy first, so that we can kind of understand what's going on. This one will cover the first 7, and I'm going to tell you what all 14 of them are, but this will cover the first 7 so that you kind of get this broken up into smaller videos, and you don't get inundated with 20-30 minute videos, and some of them may end up being longer as of course the term goes on. But anyway, for those of you out there in video land, if you will, who are not students of my class, my name is John Newton, and I am an American government teacher at a high school in my local area. So here we go. The first one is citizen participation, regular, free, and fair elections. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move me over here out of the way so that we can see all these. Accepting the results of the election, the rule of law, majority rule with minority rights, accountability, transparency, limited government and a Bill of Rights, control of the abuse of power, economic freedom, equality, individual or human rights, independent judiciary, and finally, competing political parties. So these are the first 14 principles of democracy. And again, we're going to, in this particular video, talk about the first 7. So we need to start with a guiding question, which is just asking, what is democracy? And by definition, it is a system of government in which rule is by the people, either through representatives or directly. So the first principle we're going to talk about is citizen participation. And I think it's important to say that this is not just a right, but it's a duty of all citizens. Maybe I need to move that up here into the middle, so I'm floating around. Woo. I know some of you guys went, Mr. Newton, you're weird. All right, voting, paying taxes, serving in the military, jury duty, running for public office. And this is not an inclusive list. These are just some examples and ways that citizens can participate. And the very last one, it says, even protesting against the government, or, well, anything that, we don't agree with. Now, when we say protesting, it has to be a peaceful protest. We can't destroy property, take lives, that kind of stuff that, becomes in excess and, of course, against people's rights and freedoms. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those a little later on in maybe a different video. Regular, free, and fair elections. Held at consistent times is the easiest way that I think that we could define that. And I think we do a pretty decent job of that here in the United States. You have Congress elections every 2 years, and they divide up the House and the Senate so that there's not a complete turnover every single time. And then, of course, every 4 years, there is a election for the president. So I think I said in a previous video, and it may not have been for you guys, it may have been for my world history class, that we have the right to, and it's actually pretty cool that we have the ability to overthrow our government peacefully every 2 to 4 years, and we really do have the right, at least in the United States, we have the right. And so for it to be a democracy, all citizens need to have the right to vote. And I notice I capitalize all citizens because historically speaking, we know that's not always been true here in the U.S. We started out mostly for white males, and then African Americans got the right to vote, and then lastly, it was women. Although you may go, well, but what about the voting rights? So before 1964, they had the right. And that's where it comes into, not only do they have the right, but we have to be able to adhere to the rule of law that we enact. And we'll talk a little more about that a little later. And of course, everybody has a right to run for public office. Of course, you have to meet whatever those minimum qualifications are. And there is a necessity to kind of set these established requirements because, I think it's unrealistic to have somebody who has no experience whatsoever in anything. You graduate high school and you can go run and be president of the United States. Well, of course not. That's kind of ridiculous. And I think that we did a pretty decent job, or at least our founders did. All votes are counted equally. So that means that my vote, your vote, anybody who votes in this election, it's a 1-for-1. Every vote you cast gets counted one time, not multiple times, not half or whatever. And of course, accepting the results of the election. And I gotta say that that is a subjective statement, I believe, because while we don't always agree, we do accept this peaceful transfer of power regardless of the belief in the winner's ability to govern. I think that the current political climate that we have in the United States right now is an excellent example in this video. So if anybody sees this in the future, this video is currently being made in January of 2019, and as you know, there is some political turmoil, but this is nothing new to, well, really any country. But the uniqueness of the United States is, and I put that example, is that all elected U.S. offices, and that was kind of the would this really happen and would this continue kind of thought process by our founding fathers. The intent was for people to serve the public and then go back to their own private life. And they didn't really know if it would work, or at least past their generation. And it really has. I said already that we overthrow the government every 4 years. Now, sometimes we get to extend it 4 more years, at least with the head of the state. We know that we go back and forth in between the power in one political party or the other. But it's a great thing to just go, you know what, we lost this time, which we'll talk about the majority rule and how even though we peacefully do this, then there are some stipulations that you can't just sort of kind of run amok, if you will. The rule of law is that everyone must obey the law and are held accountable if violated. So if you're in this country, if you don't follow the rules, you are subject to those laws. No exception. And those laws, of course, have to be equal and fair. We can't just pick, willy-nilly what we're going to enforce and when we're going to enforce it. And while you may disagree, and this somewhat probably comes from being exposed to, and I don't want to use the term fake news, but you know, bad publicity about what's really going on. People are not just arbitrarily picked out. I mean, if you break the law, they're going to get you, because they just don't have time to be like looking for people. And some of you, of course, will disagree, and that's okay. And that's the beauty of it too, is that it's okay for you to disagree and to say that you disagree. Which leads to this, the majority rule with minority rights. I put this at the very top. Tyranny of majority equals destroys democracy. So once this political group wins the election, they still have a right to govern how they see fit, but that right only extends to uphold democracy. So the minority is actually not only allowed to organize and speak out, but they're actually allowed to have a role within government. Now, it is a minority rule, so right now the majority in the U.S. House of Representatives is the Democratic Party. Does that mean that the Republicans have no say? No. They have a majority. A minority say. So they still have a vote. Now, they have fewer votes, but they have a vote. They have a voice. They have the right to, speak out either against or for any piece of legislation and what's going on. And that keeps that's part of that, and we'll talk a little bit more about the checks and balances, but there's even checks and balances within each group to keep any one piece of that group, I've already used the term run amok, so I guess we'll stick with that. But they just can't, go run around doing whatever they want to, which leads to accountability. They're elected, they're appointed officials, and they are responsible for their actions, and they are accountable to the people. So it is about the will of the people. You like to think that, somebody wouldn't try to get elected only to just push through their own personal agenda. The people, who cares what they think? Now, have people tried to do that in the past? Sure. And there's probably a few elected officials out there right now who somewhat disregard the will of the people, but typically, by the time they get elected, the people already know who they are. They know about them. They have an index of belief that when any issue arises, that this elected official will act within an appropriate accordance of expectability of their own beliefs. Now, the cool thing is if they don't, they can be removed. It's a little harder in some public offices, and it's a little easier in the others, and it depends on how the rules are written about being removed. But it is possible. And, of course, pretty much every president since, modern time has been faced with the threat of impeachment. Trump's not the first one. Obama, Clinton, Bush, they've all kind of faced this threat. And the last thing that we're going to talk about is transparency. And all of these are important in their own right, and I feel that transparency is probably one of the more important pieces of democracy. And it's, we elect these officials and they go off to Washington, D.C., or they go off to wherever your state capital is, because, we elect the local officials, we elect our state officials, and, of course, our federal level officials in the government. And we need to know what they're doing. We need to know that they are being accountable to, what we expect of them. So these meetings are public, and you can show up to them. Citizens, yes, are allowed to attend, or at least know what happened in the meeting, so they do publish minutes of the meeting. They because it's modern times, they have websites. C-SPAN is a good example of being able to watch what's going on TV. You can show up to City Hall and watch your local representatives talk about what's going on. So this is the first 7. I think we did a little 15-minute overview, and hopefully this will get you started thinking about democracy and kind of help you understand a little bit better. So thanks for watching. Again, my name is John Newton, and I guess subscribe and like for the other videos for my students. If you want to subscribe, you're more than welcome to subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I would say you guys, you're more than welcome to leave comments as well. I know you guys like to say funny things in class, but that is it for the first 7 of the 14 points of democracy.